think I see that it is started. So, hello and welcome to Tech Time Today. My name is Jeff Welpley. I'm your host, as usual. And with me today, I have two special guests from my CTO forum group that I meet with on a monthly basis. Two amazing tech leaders in the Boston area. Sorry, I had a background thread running. I had to close down. So welcome, John and Neil. Why don't you guys give it just like a quick introduction to yourself? Just get started. And Neil, why don't you start first?
Great. Hi, I'm Neil Karasik. I am currently the VP of Product Management at LabViva, a Series B startup in the Boston area. And we sell software to life sciences research and development. Long career leading product teams and sometimes engineering teams at startups here in the Boston area, and also do some angel investing. I will pass it over to John.
Hey everyone, I'm John Zablocki. Most people know me as Jay-Z. I'm the VP of Technology at Embark Vet here in Boston. We are the leading provider of dog DNA tests and actionable insights. Like Neil, long career in startups, a few in Boston, down in New York City, Connecticut. So excited to be here.
Good. Yeah, so the agenda for today is pretty straightforward. I kind of roped both of these guys in because in our meetings on a monthly basis, we always, just like every tech leader out there, are talking a lot about AI and usage within our organizations. And I've been doing a lot of work recently on some sort of foundational pieces that I wanted to try to, but stress test to see, kind of get some feedback and that type of thing. But also eventually I want to create some stuff that I can share in kind of like a open source GitHub repo that potentially can help other people. So this is a chance for me to kind of go over the stuff that I built, and then both Neil and John have been kind of building their own stuff in their own organizations. So we'll compare and contrast, see where there's some similarities, differences, things that could be improved, etc. So does that make sense?
Sounds good.
Good.
Sounds good.
Okay. I'm gonna share my screen because to start off with, I'm going to go over the high-level concepts of what I've been working on, and then kind of we can look at the actual code itself. This is an opening slide I use for all my presentations, so it doesn't mean anything. But this thing that I've been working on, I'm kind of tentatively calling it the proprietary AI context shell. We'll get back to that and whether that's a good name or there's something better or whatever. But the basic idea or the concept at a high level is that I think everybody kind of sees on an individual basis, especially power users, people that like, I know both of you guys, that there's a lot of like really amazing things that can be done. But the thing that's a struggle is how to get the AI tools adopted in the most optimal way at an organizational level. Like I think that like Neil, I think you and I have talked a number of times of you have, I think you mentioned you have a couple employees that are like really advocate big users of AI, but then others who are not, right?
Yeah, I would say it's certain folks are way ahead of the curve, really deeply engrossed in using AI, to build lots of stuff and, to take, big shots. And other folks, everybody's using it, but other folks are more, using it, but not fully, to its fullest potential is what I'd say.
Yeah. So that's basically what I want to focus on is like the approach of how you utilize this in a way that it start to be baked more into your normal day-to-day processes so that it's like embraced more and it's leveraged in a better way. And so the sort of mental model that sort of the way I think about it, which actually this comes from an Anthropic talk that I watched a couple weeks ago, is this sort of layered number of circles where at the center is the actual model itself. Obviously, it's sort of the center to everything, and that's going to continue to improve and get better, obviously, with each release and whatever. So Opus 3.6 or 3.6 just came out or whatever. they'll continue to get better and better.
4.6.
But then the sort of layer on top of it is the agentic layer that each of these companies are creating that makes it even more powerful. So Claude Code, Gemini CLI, Codex, etc. Right? So these two make sense, right?
Yep.
Okay. But I think the thing that's sort of not as focused on or not as thought in a more systematic way is this sort of layer on top of the agentic layer provided by these frontier companies, Anthropic and everybody else, where you're putting like your proprietary knowledge. I mean, really what you want in an ideal case is that, you know, engineer, that the best engineer in your organization who's been there for like 20 years and knows everything, like getting their brain codified in a way that it's everybody who's using AI is also using that developer's brain or whatever. You know what I mean? That like it is all of your organizational knowledge is kind of baked into AI as well, and so that's what's part of this context shell. And so there's different ways you could do this. So like in the extremes, like on the left side is there's definitely a lot of approaches. Like I would say like the Claude bot, OpenClaw type stuff is more like what I view as the sort of chaotic approach, which is, you know, you give your agent that you're using the ability to have some sort of memory and to improve in theory or whatever, but you're not really actually focusing on how it's doing that. You're not focusing on the way that the different artifacts are organized. You're sort of like letting it organize itself, and you know it does get better in some sense, but it's sort of like a black box to you, right? Whereas on the other extreme is that you treat the artifacts that are part of whichever model you're using. So for Claude Code, it would be like the Claude Code skills and agent markdown files and all that type of stuff. You take you treat it as if it's your code, like as you focus on making sure that it's organized in the right way and structured in the way that humans like you and I can understand it. So it's not a black box. Like you actually do take special care. And in that way, like you sort of understand a little bit of what it's not as much of a black box, what the AI is thinking about. You kind of understand where it's coming from and you're able to help improve it in whatever. And this is the approach that I'm sort of advocating for. So in this context shell, there's, you know, sort of 5 different pieces that align with the different types of artifacts that you can have with most of the different models these days. So core knowledge, activity tracking, runtime, shortcuts, and compliance. And I'll kind of go into these. And for each of these, like different people use these in different ways. So like this is like there's a certain approach with this that I'm sort of advocating for. So with skills, the way I view it is like these are the core of everything. This is where you're putting all of your domain knowledge. And there's different types of skills. Like you actually should explicitly organize it in a way where you have kind of more lower level foundational stuff that's maybe not as proprietary or more just like some stuff like you know the format of your Git commits or whatever. Like it's not anything that crazy. As a you know, the higher level skills that use a lot of the other skills is, you know, work like something like a workflow. So like your actual the way that you do pull requests or that whole process of your developer workflow of like from the moment that it's planned to you know, proving your plan, you know, implementing, testing, deploying. Like each organization has a specific workflow, the way that they want to do those, and that should be actually codified, you know, in a particular skill. And that's sort of a higher level skill. Then there's, you know, for like a code skill would be for like one specific part of your code base, kind of explaining that in full and how it works and intricacies and whatever, etc. And we'll go into a little bit of these when I show the example.
Where do
and yeah,
things like front end component libraries, or where do you see those falling?
Like, you
Like
just mean best practices for them?
well, just like we're standardized on Chakra 3.
Yeah. Like across the board, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in your like I'll show, I sort of think that it makes the most sense to minimize what's in your like main context file, like at the highest level. Like, so for Claude, it's like the Claude MD file that has that's loaded in every single session that you have. Like, it should be like super minimal. And for each of your, so everything else should be pushed down. Most of it should be pushed down to skills. And for the skills, you, in your description, you're identifying, the conditions under which it's that whole context is pulled in. So like, there's some skills where it's like, only if you're looking at this part of the code base, or only if this. But then for what you're talking about is a more general one. You can put in the description so that Claude knows to pull it in every single time that you're trying to like write any like Angular. Like, I do this for Angular. Like for Angular, I have like anytime because we use Angular in a couple different places and we have best practices. And so it's like anytime that you run Angular code, you pull in this skill. You know what I mean? Um, and then, oh, sorry. And I was starting to say, for creating these, so actually, I'll talk at the end of like some thoughts I have of how to get started with all this. But on a per skill basis, I view it as like a collaborative thing with the AI tool that I'm like, I dump it like my information. So for example, for like one part of my code base, I'm like, okay, this is how it works. Everything for my brain, like brain dump. um, and by the way, also in addition to my brain dump, do your own kind of research, look through my code base and like see what you can kind of figure out on your own. And then let's talk about it. And then like I usually like do a back and forth where I'm like, ask me questions. And then like I'm like, okay, I'm gonna quiz you, like go keep going back and forth until it's like really refined. And then even then, as I go on for number two there, like anytime that it doesn't work as I expect. So like if I'm working with Claude Code on a particular part of my code base and it is using that skill, but it misunderstood one thing, and then whenever anything that happened, I'm like, okay, this is what it's supposed to be, and make sure you update that skill. So like there's a continuous process, iterative process of continue to update those different pieces of knowledge within your that's checked into your repo, used by all the rest of your team, etc. So like as the team continues to use it, it keeps getting better and better. And the last thing, the generating code thing on the skill level, the markdown files are just words. It's like non-deterministic part of it, even in the best cases, like sometimes the AI models don't use it in the right way. What helps a little bit is if you have something like deployments, like obviously you could script out everything for deployments, like make it all code. But for some parses of the way we do things, it's actually like there is a little bit of decision making that goes on in terms of like rollbacks and like whatever else. And so it's a mix of in the current process, like non-AI current process. Like for us, it's like some human decision making and running some scripts or whatever. And so like I'll often, we'll have our skill in Claude Code for doing deployments that tries to codify what's in my brain for like the human decision making we do. But I'll tell it like, okay, if you can generate any code to help you do this like more efficiently, do that. And so within your skills, sometimes like the skill will have its own like little code scripts that can help make it run faster and more deterministic and whatever.
I'm curious, Jeff, as you
Yeah.
work to create these skills, to create these knowledge bases, are you working with product to create that deep library of like what the app should do? Like how much of this is cross-functional?
Yeah, it's a good question because we actually it started off with us just having developers doing it just for coding, but we just started having this past week, I pushed some of our non-developer people, both business analysts and product people, to start using it. And so there is some crossover of stuff that's used, but let me keep going, because the next thing, there's different artifacts that are created to track the different types of activities. So like for workflows, like for skills, like at the workflow level, even for product managers, they have their own workflows. Like they might not be writing code, that might not be part of their responsibilities, but they also have, like, they track, it depends on what the way you guys do things, but like we have like sagas and different, the typical Scrum stuff for backlogs and planning out how work activities, what the priorities are and strategies or whatever. So there's a whole bunch of things that they work at that's more like, um, not coding based, but it does include artifacts. It does include some documentation. And so we've started to kind of bake those in with their own kind of like product manager skills as well. And so, yeah, so for activity tracking, which I started to talk about there, for anything that then as the team starts using these different skills and using Claude Code or whatever this is transferable to other agents as well. We want to track everything that happens. So when somebody is making a change, something that essentially gets put into a pull request eventually and then merged in and deployed, that there's a document created for that tracks everything. And in the past, for us at least, we did have some levels of documentation for that. We had different systems for this or whatever. And so there's like, if you use different Scrum tools or whatever, like maybe you are doing part of this, but I found this like really useful. Like AI does a really good job of tracking, the minute details of, the actual planning process, what happens during testing, all through deployment. So like even in the few weeks that we've been using this, I've heavily relied on the artifacts that are created, for any of these activities. And then, so for subagents, the way we use it is maybe different than other people, but like the way I view this is like subagents are like a runtime optimization that everything, the actual core knowledge is pushed down to skills. And so subagents is more about managing context. So like, I'm pretty sure you guys, we've talked about this level of stuff before, but you guys understand of like the difficulties of like the context window. So like both when you hit your limit, but even if you don't hit the limit and run out of context, the bigger it gets, the less quality you're gonna get, right? I mean, so like it's helpful to create ways of making sure that your context window stays clean. And so subagents is like a really good way to do that. So one good example for this that we use is when we're doing, I have an example at the very end I'm going to show you guys, when we're looking at bugs in the system. And for like one thing, just as an example, when we have an issue with our telephony system, we have to look through these huge log files for our Dractio and FreeSwitch servers. And just looking through those logs, like, fill up the context window super quick, right? So instead of doing that in just like one thread with the one main agent, we have what we call the chief of staff, which is just an orchestrator, spin up, 8 different support engineer agents. Each one looks at a different server, like individual server, just looking through the logs to find the right thing, and then they combine them all together. And so it's much faster, much more efficient. And then the kind of chief of staff, the context window for the chief of staff remains really tight and clean, and it just gets like the learnings from each of them, and then kind of like is able to hone in on what, and then pass that off to another agent to look into the actual code itself. Like, okay, here's the specific errors. Now it has reduced down to just like these couple lines. Now go into the code base and figure out, why this might have happened or whatever. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes.
And then for custom commands, like actually, Anthropic changed some of this recently. They've they've sort of pushed people to like merge some of the concept of commands and skills so that you can actually have a callable skill. So like technically you can do a slash whatever and call the skill directly, which is somewhat the same thing, but just conceptually, with the way I like to think about it is that I don't have any of my skills as directly callable, and I have it like I like to keep them separate, like custom commands, because like I feel like that's more like user interface. So it's much more about like simplifying how users use the most common things that we do. So I have a couple examples on the left side here. One of them I just mentioned, like for a bug, and so like we have it. You could basically paste almost anything, like a bug. You could do slash bug and a URL or like a stack trace or whatever else, and we have everything set up that it knows how to then from there connect to the right system, find what the issue is, and then give you um, it thinks the root cause and fix is. And then yeah, deployments, research. Actually, the research thing, one of our non-technical guys has like gone crazy with this the past week, because we have this hooked up to Google Analytics, our Google Analytics, and our Search Console and SEMrush, and like a bunch of whole systems, like for our like through APIs with, or in some cases, if they have an MCP server, we use that. But it basically, whatever question you ask, it uses all those different connections to like do like a really good, it's like doing a deep research document with access to all of your internal stuff. You know what I mean? So it's super helpful. And then the last thing, which to be honest, I don't have a good, when I get into the code and what I have created, like I don't actually have a lot for this because just because my current company doesn't deal with a ton of compliance related stuff. But typically the answer for making sure that auditing, and if you need any like gatekeeper type, security checkpoints and whatever, that's what usually you use hooks for, that for the different parts of the life cycle of Claude Code or whatever else, you can hook into that and have some deterministic code that always will log in a certain area or always will validate that you're not putting private information in or whatever else it happens to be. So that's basically what's used there most of the time. Okay, so before I get into my code, just to checkpoint to you guys, like I just wanted to kind of go through that at a high level, see what you guys think, like conceptually. Does that make sense? Does that line up with the way you guys do things? Like, what do you do differently?
Yeah, I had a quick question first for that last point about where would you draw the line between doing it that way and just having something run in your deployment pipeline, for example?
Wait, doing it with like for security checks, compliance checks, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if you are already calling scripts or like having it automated in a programmatic way, you could just keep it doing that. Like the thing that I think makes sense for using hooks is if and when you do have certain processes that you are kind of handing off to AI to be like the brains that runs it, which isn't necessarily everything. And maybe that's not even a good idea for certain things that like do have a lot of compliance security requirements. But for us, we found a lot of use for certain like things that like just for like planning out certain changes and stuff like that. Like the process, we came up with a process, the sort of like pre-implementation stage of workflow where like just generating the plan and everything, like brainstorming on that plan, creating a PR on GitHub that has the plan, that then like, and pinging the people on Slack to like review that. Like that's like, I mean, seemingly simple, but like actually it was kind of cool to set up that part of the process, kind of where Claude Code is like running that fully for us, and seems to work pretty well.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, I'm impressed with how structured you've gotten in your journey here. I think we're earlier in the process on our side. And I think some of that is, as you can imagine, a bioinformatics pipeline that figures out a dog's ancestry is very different than building a web app. And so some of our code lends itself really easily to skills, where some of it is really complex science. Basically, Jupyter notebooks that become production systems are much harder to codify than some of our web standards and things. So certainly inspired by some of the stuff you showed to go a little deeper and see what we can do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let me share my Visual Studio Code window. Hold on, let me make sure that it's set up right. All right, can you see my Claude.md?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so I mentioned at the beginning how in earlier versions of what I was doing, I mean, I've gone through so many iterations and I will continue to refine this. Like my Claude MD has been huge and small and big again. But now I really, after testing out a bunch of stuff, like I do think it makes a lot of sense to keep this really, really small and tight. You can push most of the knowledge and stuff that you want down to skills. So just like the high level stuff, I mean, and nothing crazy, but just like some stuff for just making sure that the main agent like always follows. Importantly, I mean, this is just like an extra reminder. It already does do this, and I tested it out, but like this is just to kind of like reemphasize, like make sure you use skills because like a bunch of stuff is in there. But it will usually do that by default. Okay, so let's look in our Claude file directory, and so I do organize all of my skills into categories. So I kind of prefix them with the category name just to, again, all this is Claude doesn't need this, or any agent that you use doesn't need it to be set up like this in such a structured way. So it's more for us as humans. And the important thing, and I've noticed this just even in the short time I've been starting to use this, is that by having it set up in this way, I am able to help the agent more learn and grow. Like there'll be times where it makes some sort of mistake, and because I've put some time into structuring this, I'm like, oh, I know why it is. It's because of this, or it's because of that, and it gives me the ability to like keep on refactoring some of these skills in a much more efficient way because I know that like what each part does basically. So for the different types of skills, I mentioned I showed that sort of pyramid thing of like there's sort of more like lower level skills, like the Git skills and the higher level skills. But just to give like one sense of idea, so like for like a service client skill, like these are all ones that in my mind wrap an external service. So they're all kind of connectivity to these other things like out there to get either to get information or sometimes to do stuff, but mostly getting information. So yeah, Google Analytics, Google AdSense for us, our SEO tool, like everything. So this gives it like a ton of power for like pulling in information. And so yeah, most of the time an API, but sometimes an MCP, sometimes the CLI, depending on what the thing is.
Is your structure here, Jeff, is this assuming you have a mono repo, or are you storing the skills as a separate repo and then bringing them in?
That is a really good question. So ours is a mono repo, and it is a challenge when you don't have a mono repo because you need to have an efficient way of like sharing it among all of your stuff. And I was going to mention this at the end, but like just to talk about that quickly, there's not currently a great way. Like you can treat it like code and just share it that way, and that's probably what most people have been doing. But like sharing skills, especially like when you're using like public skills that you share. I mean, it's one thing in sharing internally to your different projects. Like you could probably figure out that and do it just like you do with code. But for yeah, it's just I don't think it's been thought out enough of like how to share these. Because I don't think it works the same way as code, necessary in certain ways. So it's an area where hopefully there'll be better solutions in the future, I guess. But for now, it's like copy paste almost between your
Sure.
projects, you know. And then, yeah, I mentioned like the code ones. So like I have, you could see here on the left side, for like each part of my code base, like there's like a GH web is like a certain part of the code base, legacy web, like an NG1. These are all like different parts of the code base. And like, if I open it up just for a second, you could see that it in the description, which is like this, when skills are loaded into memory, like the full context file isn't loaded initially when Claude Code starts up. It's just the description it is, and then if with whatever activity you're doing in your agent, um, your coding agent, it sees something that matches, then it'll pull in the full context. So like you want to make sure that whatever's in the description is the thing that Claude Code in this case is looking for to bring in the full context. So I make sure that it has like the directory name, like anything in this directory, or like any like keywords or whatever I want it to key off of when the user either types it in or it's in a custom command or whatever. You can explicitly invoke like tell Claude to use certain skills, but um, by doing it this way, like it also follows like just by other keywords that you might say or things that it might be doing. So yeah, for the code stuff, and then like I mentioned, the workflow um, skills, and so for each of the workflow skills, uh, each workflow skill in the way that we use it is associated with some sort of artifact. So like if you think about like there's a process, your internal process within your organization that you're trying to get AI to help you manage in some way. And so this not only has like in here somewhere down here, I think it has like the full uh, yeah. So like this has like an example of like what the different stages are. You know, what is the actual workflow and different stages. But there's usually like an artifact associated with it. And so like this is like the template for the artifact. So each of these workflows has like some sort of template associated with it for that artifact that captures that particular instance of that workflow. Um, and then it saves it in this activity folder. So in our activity folder, like when we have bugs that we file, we have like the analysis of those bugs and stuff in here. For any change sets that we do, any releases, like any research projects. So like here are some research projects that we've been doing recently. Um, and so those are all a result of one of the workflow skills being kind of executed. And then, I mean, agents are pretty, what I would say is that for the other things, like the skills are where the bulk of the knowledge is, like I mentioned, and agents and commands should be pretty thin. So like commands, like I think they should be just like 20 lines or less, because really it's just UI. Like it's just helping the user to, in a very simple way, utilize one or more skills together. So we have like a couple commands that we do, but all of these are very short and small, just focusing on the user interface and kind of connecting person to skills and or agents. And then typically for agents, you have it associated like the different types of roles. And so an agent, because it's a runtime efficiency thing, an agent is associated with one or more skills, one or more tools, and it sort of has like a particular type of task that it's responsible for. And so, I mean, there's probably some duplication of this in different organizations, but also some differences, I'm sure. So, okay. And then the last thing I was just going to show before we just talk in general is, hold on a second. Sorry. just going to share one last thing. Okay. So I didn't want to make you guys sit for like 5 minutes while Claude Code was like actually doing something. So I was just going to show you the output for one thing where I did an example of where I did the command, the /bug command, and I just pasted it in a URL for one of our Sentry bugs. And so it right off the bat kicks off the support engineer subagent, which makes sense because it's obviously trying to debug something. And you can see that it uses the Sentry skill because it needs to know how to connect to Sentry and to actually get that information. And then later on, actually, it doesn't say that it's using this, but I know it's using this, that it uses the bug workflow skill to, once it has, now it understands the issue, yada, yada, and it comes up. Oh, and it also does use the tech lead skill to do research into the code itself to find what is causing this bug. And then it generates the artifact that has this root cause. So like it basically did everything, and was able to find what the root cause is. Like I validated that this is actually correct. Like it did all the right things. And actually, well, I won't switch it right now, but like you could see the nicer version of all this, like because it generated that artifact that has this kind of bug report. And then if you want to implement this fix and you say yes, then it'll change workflows to use, like start using the change set workflow and kind of go from there to actually start implementing a change. So anyways, that's most of kind of overview of the different things. I had a couple other small things I'll maybe mention maybe at the end, but yeah, what are your thoughts?
Exceedingly impressive, that you've gotten to this point. So I have to say that first. I'm curious as you like dig into the skills, and I think the answer is going to be because engineers are already at the command line with Claude Code anyway, versus like building that library, like the Sentry one, for example, or the bug one. Why not have it in the Claude app? Or why, like, how do you sort of imagine the skills across all the surface area of Claude? How reusable are they if they're sort of just in the code base?
Yeah, it's fair. So this lends itself to like there's a mix between things that are like generic, like which is like, so generic skill is just understanding at a general level how to utilize a particular API, utilize a particular CLI, how to do things in a general sense, because anybody who uses Sentry would be able to utilize that same general skill. But then there's like specifics, like for us, just as an example, like where does the environment variables that you need to plug into that API call are in a particular place for us that's unique to us, right? And so that's actually something that's part of that, as well as the details of like how in Sentry we might have certain things set up that are different than other, like, so like I might some of the things I started putting that are custom that are part of that skill is like, okay, make sure you ignore these things because I just know in our system that these types of things happen from time to time, and don't get confused by that, whatever. So it's this mix of like general stuff and specific stuff. And that's where, like, to be honest, I again don't think this is like where this is just like a new somewhat immature setup of things that I don't think there's the best way of handling that right now. Like the way that I'm doing it is I'm taking for the initial setup a generic version of a particular skill, like and then I'm customizing it on top of it. So I'm adding my own custom things. In an ideal case, there would be some way of having those as like separate things that, like, because let's say just sticking with the Sentry thing, Sentry themselves should in theory publish a skill of some sort,
Sure.
right?
That
And
Claude
they
can
should
use, yeah.
Yeah, and they should keep that up to date, and it should be just like you do with any other npm dependency and whatever. And then you add your custom stuff as like kind of a separate thing on top of that. But that's just not how it doesn't work that well right now. Like I don't know. I mean, have you guys run into that type of issue before? I would look for other people who have solutions for that. Like I would say that for the way I view it is like there isn't a good solution for that right now yet, but inevitably I think there will be.
Yeah, now I think it's mostly relying on, like you said, them to publish their MCP endpoint or whatever, skill they add to the Claude public or, Codex public.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
I had a question about the journey to get here. Was this a one shot where you or somebody else was like, let's figure out the way to maximize the use of skills and agents and to, orchestrate that and get it right? Or was it a, mini, slow or smaller step progression, and what might that have looked like?
Definitely not a one shot. Definitely not.
It was a little bit of a setup.
Yeah. I know. No, it's of course an iterative way. Like, I think that I had a general sense of what I want to do right from the start, based off of like readings and other things that I've looked at. But really, the more that, like you guys, I'm sure have seen, when you're actually using different things, then you see where, oh, this works well or this doesn't work well, and you have to kind of continuously update it. And so even the stuff that I have right now, like it's starting to work well for us. Like this, it's like it's maybe on our journey of like it being fully baked versus like not baked at all. Maybe we're like halfway there or something. So it hasn't been stressed too much because we're only like maybe a month into using this stuff in total. But yeah, I think if you can, the thing I would say is that if you go with the approach that, like, just at a high level, the things that, okay, what won't change? Okay. One is, if you're with me in the way that I'm thinking about things, is like I want things to be highly structured. I want to be structured in a way that I understand, right? So maybe that structure will change, maybe the details of that and whatever, but like I want to be on top of a system that I continuously think about and refine and figure out how to best structure this. And then number two is set up the mechanisms of getting all of your team using it. So like it does help, the more people that use it for the more things, the better you'll be able to start that flywheel of improvement, right? And so I guess figuring out what the barriers are helps. Of like, even for our internal team members, maybe it's like stupid stuff like, oh, for our non-technical people, like, do they need access to GitHub now so that they can share these things? And there's like some, even though they don't have to write code, that if we do have it shared as part of our mono repo, they do have to understand some like Git update things or whatever now, or at least have it as part of what Claude does for them. But whatever barriers you can do it so that the more usage, the better it's going to set it up so that it can continuously improve over time. I guess those would be, off the top of my head, the biggest things that I would be trying to set up.
And could you talk a little bit about the sort of rollout and onboarding and how that went? Because I'm sure there were folks who were more involved in sort of doing the experimenting and figuring out what worked and what didn't, and then there's a larger group that you've got to get on board and also help them understand the experimentation process.
Yeah, for sure. And it was literally lock people in a room for us. Like we went on a retreat, and just told everybody to bring their laptops and just booked the whole day. And we're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Like, okay, these are the things that we've set up. Like, okay. And we looked at okay, what's the tasks that you have for the next, week that maybe are or not covered by this, go through some examples, whatever else. So it was I guess I had a heavy-handed approach that might not work in all environments. So I don't know, for a non-heavy-handed approach, like, yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that a little bit more.
And how many folks were at that offsite, and what roles?
I see. That's the other thing, is I have a small team, so it's
Yeah.
easier, right? So like 5 of us, like, and like 2 of us were already 5 of us. They're there, and then we have like the part-time people. Like it's easy for them because they'll just do what we say. They're just contractors or whatever. So for the 5 core people, two of us were already heavily using it. So it was really just convincing 3 people
Yeah.
to do it. So like obviously that's like much easier than the larger teams that you guys have.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'm familiar by name with things like Kilo and Ralph. I'm not familiar with, and I have no experience with those tools, but my understanding is that they have some opinions on how all this stuff gets set up and orchestrated long term. I'm curious if part of your effort was look at what's out there, like Kilo has templates for doing stuff. Did you look at that world, or
Yeah.
are you sort of like waiting that out?
Yeah, no, I definitely did. Yeah. And I think what I found, and maybe so there isn't something that does exactly what I'm trying to do, but like the most common things I found is like on one side for like the Claude bot type thing is that they try to set things up so it's hands off, so that minimal. Again, I mentioned that you don't actually, it's black box. You don't like understand the structure, whatever else. It's like it's done all for you. And so not just call about or open claw, whatever. Like there's a bunch of other systems that are very similar to that I've seen, that like they try to have this kind of passive approach to the AI improving and getting better. And I think there's some validity in some of those. And maybe it's not all or nothing. Like maybe some parts of those actually should be implemented as part of your system. But and then the other thing that I've seen a lot is just like sort of like static context files being shared. So like just a Git repo with like, oh, here's my 20 skills, or like here's my main Claude.md to like use that's like amazing or whatever. And yeah, so I've looked at a whole bunch of those, and like those are good to some degree or whatever, but like those are not specific to your organization, number one, and almost certainly not optimized for what you need to do. So like I think it's good to take learnings from those and maybe use as starters in some cases or whatever. But like the thing that I'm advocating for is that the most efficient way you're going to utilize AI is if you do make it very specific for your current environment, your current processes, etc.
Which I think makes sense for where we are in the journey of these tools in general. I think it's a little early to make a big bet on one of these platforms. I mean, Claude, obviously a safe bet, but like the Kilos and the Ralphs are pretty nascent.
I just noticed, by the way, that we do have actually questions on the live stream. So let's actually talk about those. So from Beans5557, any thoughts on using different frontier models in the same code base? So using Opus versus, I think they're mean like switching between different models. Yeah, sure. Yeah, what do you guys think about that?
My experience is limited there. I certainly have team members who will, test the limits of various models for different cases, and then, talk about them in Slack with the team, and people will compare notes. But, that it also changes, release to release. So it's certainly a challenge to try and figure out what's the best to use for any given situation.
Yeah, we're still experimenting with different models. We use Codex for some things. We use Claude for most things that we're doing with AI. Personally, I found Codex to be getting better and better with 5.4 now, or 5.2, whatever it is. I think the consistency is helpful. Sometimes I'll use Claude to check GPT's work and vice versa, and I find that's a pretty fair way to use multiple models and see what they each can do. But I think my team in general has mostly landed on Claude and staying focused with the Opus models.
Yeah, what I would say is like there's with his question, he mentions Opus and Codex. So like those are like two in my mental model. There's two different levels. Like there's the core level, which is the actual like model itself, which is like the Gemini, whichever Gemini version or whichever Opus or Sonnet. Like those are all different like core model versions, and there's definitely value like cost wise for switching between different things for certain tasks. My own organization is small enough that like we don't ring up enough costs for it to matter, so we just use the most highest level model. In terms of our dev work, we actually no, so we do switch for in our actual app integration, like the models that are used by our running apps that are used by our users. We do take care to pick a particular model for that because it saves money for things that are needed for differently. But then the other part of that, if you're talking about like Codex versus Claude Code versus Gemini CLI, I do think all the tools are similar. Like you mentioned, John, that you're going to use Codex and it's getting good. And I've used that in Gemini CLI as well. And they're all like pretty good. But I do think there's value to standardizing, to having all your team members use one or the other, just because then they kind of share their common experience or whatever. I mean, do you guys agree with that?
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even our team selected, a year and change ago, Cursor put together a really nice onboarding sort of package, rolled it out to the team, and that's what everybody uses with, different models.
And then our friend John Osborne asked, how do you manage auth credentials for things like CLIs? I'll just say right now, for the way that I've been doing it, is because I have all of our skills and everything else as part of our code base, and the way that we handle credentials for everything in our code base is we have kind of environment files that obviously aren't checked into source control, that just developers have in reference. So for us, it's pretty straightforward that we just give access to the skills to utilize certain parts of the environment files. But it could probably get pretty complex if you have like a more sophisticated configuration system. Do you guys do anything for that?
I mean, we use AWS secrets, as a primary way of storing, those sorts of credentials. But we haven't gone deep on anything where we'd need credentials stored for skills.
Well, and the reason why, at least what we use it for, is with those skills that are in the service client category, where we're actually connecting to these external services and stuff like that. So yeah, maybe there's probably it'd be nice if the agentic platform itself had like a better way to handle that. We'll create a list of different things that we can send to Anthropic and Google and OpenAI. Okay, last question from the chat. How would you handle larger context/data sets that scale past the traditional context windows? Yeah, and I guess for me, I did mention earlier that I had a system set up for like log files that are long, and I basically split it up on like for that it works out because even though the files are huge, they're split among different deployed containers, and so we have one subagent, one context window per deployed container, so that kind of like makes it manageable. But if in theory you were pulling in data even in that one case that was like larger than the context window, I mean that's a lot. I guess you would have to figure out a way of somehow splitting it up further. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have a better answer for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a question of splitting it up, and I think, it's how you split it up. It depends on the problem you're trying to solve, right? Because there could be instances where you have a lot of data, but you're only interested in not, some subset of that data. And so pulling that out programmatically and then having the AI do some analysis, or, there are different techniques you could use to shrink the context.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. I don't want to be respectful of your time and everything. I think this is a good conversation. The thing where I am going from here, just so you guys know, is that I do want to, this is the sort of brainstorming part of my journey with this, of I'm trying things out. I want to talk to you guys about it. Love to hear, for anybody watching, comment below on questions you have or things that you guys do out there that are different than what we talked about today. But what I want to get to is having part of this is not a codified thing. It's more of a mental model thing. So I'm going to, whether it's a presentation or I have a more refined video to kind of really some of the conceptual stuff I want to refine and get out there. But then for helping people to do some of these, I mean, just like I talked about, it's not as simple as having, some people have done, having here's my GitHub repo of 50 skills, just copy these. No. It's a process of how you actually go about creating these yourselves and integrating them into your organization. And so I think there is a way of getting AI to help guide you doing that. And so that's what I'm going to be working with, working towards in the next week or two, setting up so that it's okay, here, use this, paste it, copy and paste this into your Claude Code window, and it will help start guiding you through building this on your own. That's basically what I want to get to, something like that. So
Sounds great.
Cool.
Yeah, this is fantastic, Jeff. Yeah.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
No problem. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for watching. And I will see you again next time on Tech Time Today.